Hello, good morning, and good evening to everyone who's joined, depending on the part of world that you're in. This is Rethinking Legal Ops, where we have forward-thinking conversations about the many ways artificial intelligence and the way we practice law. I'm Ashwarya Saxena. I'm the head of legal at Speed Legal, and today with me I have our amazing guest, Josh. He's the director of ALITA, which is the Asian Tech Association. I'm sorry if I messed up the name. I've always called it ALITA. Josh has also worked in AI policy and governance in Singapore, where he's an attorney. And he's all of my amazing colleagues from Berkeley Law LLM program, where he is currently which he's currently wrapping up. Really, really pleased to have you here, Josh. And also, in the short time that he's been in Berkeley, he's managed to find BLIT, the Berkeley Legal Innovation Technology Center, which is awesome. Check that out. And yeah, really excited to have you here, Josh. And tell us a little bit about your journey as an attorney, how you ended up in legal tech, and all the awesome things you're doing.
First, I want to say thank you to Aishwarya and the Speed Legal team for having me. It's a great pleasure. As Aishwarya, so kindly mentioned, right now I'm in Berkeley Law. I'm pursuing my Masters of Law degree, which will be wrapping up, unfortunately, really soon. Time has flown by really, really fast. But how did I find myself here? I graduated from the Singapore Management University School of Law back in 2015, and I went into legal practice. I was doing about a year and a half worth of international arbitration work in a law firm. And thereafter, what I wanted to do was not just to be a big fish in a small pond, the small pond being the legal industry, but kind of like a small fish in a huge pond, right, which is the entire economy. And that's why I went to policy, and I went into the Ministry of Law specifically because that would be a nice pivot between my legal hat and what I wanted to learn in policy. In the Ministry of Law, I worked on legal policy, which means creating new legislation, things like the Protection from Harassment Act, things like reforming our penal code and the criminal procedure code. Somehow, fortunately, they all seem to deal with online technology. And I think that was just the wave at the time. And looking forward, I asked myself, what else did I want to do that was future looking? Because my aim really is to leave a mark in redesigning societal relationships that have been disrupted by technology. It so happened that there was a space in the Personal Data Protection Commission in the AI governance team, which looks at AI governance, looks at AI regulations, looks at AI ethics. And I was asked to join, and so I did. And I did that for a couple of years. Some of the highlights that I had included drafting Singapore's Model AI Governance Framework, which is kind of like our informal soft law, soft regulation sort of guide, industry guide on how companies can operationalize responsible AI. But diving into the world of AI with all these ideas of digitalization, the use of data, the use of algorithms, and so on, made me realize that there is so little that I know about digital technologies, but there's even less that I knew about the base of those digital technologies, which is analog technology. And so I wanted to go to a place where I could get that information and how law wraps around that. And that's how I started looking for a Master's of Law. And Berkeley, very fortunately, I'm very thankful that they chose me because it is the top law and technology master's program that you can find in the US or in the world. So go Bears. But yeah, that's basically how I found myself here. And I'm really, really excited to answer the questions that Aishwarya, you have lined up for me.
And thank you, Josh. And indeed, go Bears for all the Berkeley people watching here today, and also otherwise. But thank you, Josh. What an amazing and trailblazing journey you've had, and I'm so excited to talk to you about topics in legal tech in the Asia Pacific region. And just to get started, my first question would be. Legal tech in general is like it's the it thing now, and it's we've seen a lot of adoption here in like the West, like in the US, around Europe too. But the Asia Pacific, in particular Southeast Asia, it's a huge region for lots and lots of foreign direct investment right now. Lots of exciting business opportunities there, and the legal industry is booming. What is the level of legal tech adoption in Singapore? And also, if you could talk a little bit about just the Asia Pacific region in general.
Thank you so much for that question. I think it's really, really important. I couldn't put it better the way that you've said it. Just to share a little bit about my credentials in legal tech, and I think credentials is a big thing for lawyers, right? They always say, if you don't have expertise, why are you talking about that? Legal tech has been, sort of my passion on the side, besides my job, or my day job rather, in Singapore, for the last 5 or 6 years. Back when I was an associate in the law firm, I co-founded a virtual publication on law and technology called LawTech.Asia. And that was basically to enhance and raise the awareness and trust among lawyers for the use of technology in the legal profession. And then we sort of pivoted to technology law, but that was later on. And then in 2019, I was asked to start a regional organization based in Singapore that will look at legal technology developments in the region, try to consolidate them, try to create thought leadership, create bridges, create opportunities for our members. And that turned out to be ALITA. You've got most of the words right just now. It's the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association. I will not tell you whether or not the movie Alita inspired that name. I will not disclose that. But that is basically what Alita is. We've been running Alita for a couple of years now. I was the chairperson of the steering committee, and I've since handed that mantle over to a new generation of leaders. But that is basically my involvement in the legal technology space so far. And I'm really, really fortunate because I've been able to see the development of legal technology in Singapore just as it was really booming and becoming a thing, and then seeing how that has percolated into the region as well, both in Southeast Asia, as well as in the rest of the Asia Pacific, China, Korea, Japan, Australia, the US, India, and so on. And so focusing now on the question in relation to the state of adoption of legal tech in Southeast Asia, I would say that, the adoption of legal tech in this region has always been rising. It is, a space that is nascent, but I wouldn't say that it is something that's very young as well, because places like Singapore or Australia have been looking into legal technology since the early 2010s. We're talking about 2013, maybe even 2011, maybe even before that, depending on how you define legal technology. But of course, with the current iteration of modern legal tech tools, you're looking at, for example, AI-powered chatbots, or you're looking at AI-assisted document generation tools or document management systems. I would say that the trend started to rise sometime around 2015 and 2016, and the whole process of adoption across the board in Southeast Asia has been rising even before COVID-19. But of course, COVID-19 has accelerated and compressed that process. And I think COVID-19 really was that it changed the mindsets of people, because that was the main thing that the community, at least the evangelists, right, the people who've already been converted, have been trying to do for the rest of the legal community for the past 3 or 4 years before COVID-19 happened. And then COVID-19 came, and it really compressed all the work that has been done in a few years into the span of a few short months when everyone simply locked down. And I think the thinking that then came out from there was, hey, look, actually the technologies that we need are not tomorrow. They are already here today. We just needed that change in mindset and the impetus to actually implement them and to see that, 80-90% of the time, it actually works. Right? Besides lawyers turning into cats, but I mean, that's probably the 10%, or you could say it's the 90%, I don't know. But in terms of the use of these technologies, I think they're often converging into the same use cases. Alita did a couple of reports in 2019 and 2020. We call them the SOLIA reports. We love acronyms. It's called the State of Legal Innovation in the Asia Pacific Report, and it surveys 10 or more Asia-Pacific jurisdictions, including Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines. I think Thailand has been covered as well. And looking at the state of legal innovation and adoption, legal tech adoption in those countries, what we realized in those regions and in the Asia Pacific as a whole is that there's a great convergence towards the same use cases, even though they're not coordinated. That means somehow people found the same ways to apply these new technologies like AI, blockchain, and so on, and data analytics into the same use cases, even though there was no talking about it. And so that means that there is a lot of room for cooperation, a lot of room for knowledge sharing. And what are these use cases, right? E-filing is a very common thing. E-courts, right? Case management systems in courts. These are spaces that are really very, very common in terms of the use of, let's say, AI technologies or data. In terms of the use of AI to assist in decision making as well in court systems. And in legal practice, right, I mentioned chatbots, but there's also things like automated document generation systems where you use, for example, a chatbot to help to answer certain questions and plonk them into a document. I see that Aishwarya has dropped off, but let me continue on this vein for a few minutes while she logs on again. But essentially, those I think are the use cases, that legal technology has been channeled towards in Southeast Asia. But at the same time, progress has generally been patchy across the region because in these places, they're often government driven, but because of the expensive nature of these jurisdictions, I don't mean expensive, but as in widespread, right? The uptake and implementation has often been an issue. And so if you'll give me just a few moments, I need to add Aishwarya in, so let me try and do that. I'm so sorry for the technical errors. I need to accept Aishwarya in. I'm once again really, really sorry that this has happened, but let me try and resolve these technical issues. I was giving a joke earlier to Aishwarya that any event that involves technology law is bound to have some sort of technical glitch. It just has to happen for this to be a complete tech law kind of conference. And so I'm really glad that this has happened. Hopefully it won't happen anymore. Aishwarya, I was just sharing about the joke that we had earlier, which is that we will definitely have some sort of technological hiccup. And it happened.
Was scripted. Yeah, we did this as part of the plan because we had to make the joke happen, right?
We had to, and now we have a complete event. So you've got that down. But let me just, I think, close off my answer. I was basically saying that progress in terms of implementation has been patchy. It's number one, government driven, but because of the expensive nature of the country and the jurisdiction, uptake and implementation is often an issue. And you also see differences in implementation across the different I think spectrum of law firms out there, right? The big and medium law firms generally have the capacity and resources to think about these things and to jump onto the bandwagon, whereas it is the small law firms, which often form the bulk of the law firms in the Southeast Asian jurisdictions, that have not seen the same implementation because they're worried about bread and butter issues. Of course, all this was before COVID-19, before technology became a bread and butter issue during COVID-19. And I think the final word that I would add is that regulation is often also an issue. There is still the big question out there in Southeast Asia as to how to regulate the use of legal technologies and how to make sure that lawyers are competent in using them. And so that's a question that's still, I think, unanswered and can only be answered through, I think, future sort of efforts in terms of legal education and awareness in this space.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that very, that's a lot to cover, and you did it very precisely, but that at the same time was very comprehensive. So thank you. And just sort of going more along that line, there's as you said, there's a lot of, opportunity for legal tech innovation in like Southeast Asia in general, and lots and lots of thought leadership happening along that, facilitated by the government, and also other innovators like you. I've been following all your work like LawTech.Asia and Alida, just very important, I think, to get more and more firms and lawyers to adopt legal tech and learn more about it. Can you talk a little bit about how Singapore's policies, like freedom administrative law on AI governance, have evolved to make more space for legal innovation? I know that a couple of years ago in 2020, they tried to do this research project. It was very successful, the Black Box research project, where they interviewed over 450 legal practitioners. So can you talk a bit more about how the government is supporting and creating a more conducive environment for legal innovation?
Okay. Let me try and answer the question in two parts, because the specific question that you asked in terms of how AI policies are helping legal innovation is a question that can be answered separately. But let me start first with the policies in relation to AI development and AI implementation and use across Singapore generally. Before I go into that, a quick caveat that everything that I share is just my personal views only. Please do not take them to represent any of the organizations that I'm in or were previously in. But from what I've seen, I think that the whole idea of the use of AI in Singapore is really bounded by these two considerations. The first is that the use of AI as a technology that's going to be driving the future is going to bring a lot of benefits in terms of innovation, in terms of improving quality of life, improving economic output, and the economy being one of the critical focuses in Singapore since our independence. But at the same time, being mindful as well that there are risks involved, things like fairness, concerns about discrimination and bias, concerns about cybersecurity, and so on. And so the question is, how do you create a regime that manages to balance these two, fundamentally underpinned by trust? The whole idea of trust is important, because without trust, people do not use these technologies, then you do not reap the benefits, and you are unable to see the risks that arise, and so that prevents regulators from having a clear idea of how to actually regulate these technologies. All these things have been baked into what the Singapore government calls Smart Nation. So this is a whole of government sort of initiative to ensure that Singapore is at the forefront of using smart technologies like AI, blockchain, data analytics, and so on, to empower all sectors of the economy. And one of these technologies that is identified in this Smart Nation initiative is AI. So AI is one of these pillars. And in relation to AI, I think fundamentally the push is to make sure that consumers as well as businesses are comfortable with implementing and using AI and are aware of some of the potential risks that may arise. And so that's how the AI governance picture fits in, right? And I share that context precisely to just let you know that what Singapore is trying to do is to adopt a balanced approach towards AI governance and AI regulation, and so to encourage its use to build up trust while managing risks in the background. Now, then I turn to the question of how are the AI policies shaped to allow for legal innovation specifically. I would not say that there are any specific, I think, public policies out there in relation to how the use of AI can spur legal innovation. But that being said, there are a lot of initiatives that kind of ride on each other. So, for example, the Singapore government in I think 2 years before had this initiative called FLIP. FLIP is the Future Law Innovation Program, right? And that whole idea was to provide an incubator, an accelerator, as well as provide a community for legal innovation. And some of the things that they were pushing through was the use of AI-related tools. And specifically what they did, for example, was to provide funding to law firms to actually purchase AI-powered or other sort of legal technology tools developed by Singapore legal tech companies. And then this would encourage adoption so that you would basically benefit these legal technology companies, homegrown legal tech companies, while at the same time pushing up the baseline for the legal industry as a whole. So I would say that those are some of the policies, and these you have to see they fit into the broader Smart Nation plan, which is how to use these cutting edge technologies to empower the entire economy. So I think you can see that as one example rather than a specific policy per se to use AI to empower the legal profession.
Yeah, totally. And that really resonates with me. And, just going along that thought, it's like a great segue into my next question. So thank you for that. But how can the emerging economies in the Asia Pacific, like Southeast Asia, how can they leverage AI and data analytics, just apart from legal tech tools also to benefit their economies? How are these technologies adding value there?
I think we talk about these technologies generally, and I would like to go back to the question that you asked earlier in terms of how Singapore has helped to push up legal innovation a little bit more specifically, but I'll get to that later. But in terms of AI and data analytics, I would say Southeast Asia as a whole, it's a growing digital hub, right? It's home to a growing sector of tech startups. I think the whole region, in fact, is home to quite a few tech unicorns, right? And you have seen like smartphone super apps like e-commerce, transportation. There's Grab. Grab is the Southeast Asian version of Uber. There's Gojek as well, which is also the Southeast Asian version of Uber. So there are these, I think, technology imperatives and impetuses that are coming up. So it's one of the fastest growing digital economies in the world. And I just pulled this up a couple of days ago. I think the number of digital consumers in Southeast Asia nearly tripled, right, between 2015 and 2018. So it grew from 19 million in 2015 to 250 million in 2018. Some people are saying that the next billion or next half a billion users might come from Southeast Asia or at least the Asia Pacific region as a whole. So we are situated in a place that's really, really hot for these sorts of technologies. Now, as I mentioned, right, the increased use of these digital technologies is going hand in hand with regional digital champions as well as super apps. I've already named Grab and Gojek as some examples, but there are also regional e-commerce giants like Shopee, Lazada, Traveloka, and so on. Many of these names, I could say them, but they wouldn't make sense to you unless you understand, for example, Indonesian or Malaysian. And it also comes on the back of a whole generation of millennials and Generation Z consumers that are really, really adept with using mobile technology. So ASEAN governments are aware of the importance of developing, say, AI strategies to promote benefits and mitigate risks. And so I mentioned about the Singapore Smart Nation program, and Singapore also has a national AI strategy which it pushed out in 2019. There are also other similar strategies from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand as well. But that being said, I think key gaps still exist. So, for example, one was that I mentioned about big firms. I did mention big law firms and small law firms, for example, that gap. But that gap is something that exists across the economy. You're talking about big companies in general who are able to tap onto the tech wave, and smaller companies that are not able to, right? These are local mom and pop shops that really do not care or do not have the need to care about technology, at least for the majority of the last few years. And then you have other divides as well, the city versus rural divide. And you also have things like the gender divide, right, between men and women, because Southeast Asian economies are basically quite traditional in their thinking. And you also have divides like, for example, the age gap between the older workers as well as the younger workers. So I think these are some of the policy considerations that are going on in order for AI and data analytics and related technologies to continue to rise in the region. So I think that's my long answer, really, which could be condensed, I'm sure, to your third question. But let me go back to the question in part two, because I want to answer a little bit more about how the Singapore government has been supporting legal innovation. I think the Singapore government's publicly announced focus on legal innovation and technology came up sometime in 2015, right? There was the rollout of at least you would start to hear parliamentary speeches being made in the legislative body about the use of legal technology. And then the Singapore government issued what they call a legal technology vision in 2017, which was a roadmap for the next few years in terms of how Singapore law firms should adopt technology. And that's where the Future of Law innovation program, FLIP, that I just mentioned earlier, also came about as well. There were also funding programs I mentioned earlier. These are called Tech Start for Law and Tech Accelerate, where millions of dollars were really poured in for innovation, for Singapore law firms to adopt a baseline level of technology by procuring from these Singapore homegrown legal tech companies. So you boost both sides, the supply and demand together. And then in 2020, the Ministry of Law announced a technology and innovation roadmap, which sets out, okay, what's the vision for legal tech in 2030? The report isn't publicly released, but there is an infographic showing, I think, the specific considerations, the various considerations that the ministry has been considering, and that's publicly available. And I think one exciting development that happened, I believe, earlier this year or maybe late last year, was the announcement of a national legal tech platform. So that's a collaboration between the Ministry of Law as well as one of the big law firms in Singapore and a tech platform which is called Lupl, Lupl. That is actually an international legal technology company that provides basically a program where you can stack all the various legal tech tools on top. And so you have one basically access point to access all these different legal tech tools, and that's being nationalized. So I think that creates some sort of impetus more impetus for law firms to adopt technologies. And you will see what I've shared so far is that legal tech primarily in Singapore has been driven top down from the government, right? And that's pretty much been the way it's been since even the 1990s, when you saw the rise of electronic legal research databases, e-court systems, as well as the use of technology courts. And so I think that's a pattern that will continue. I don't think it is something that necessarily should be replicated across all jurisdictions, because all jurisdictions will have their own needs. But that being said, really the adoption really depends on the specific needs, like I mentioned, of these jurisdictions. So that's to go back to your second question. And I think I've spoken a bit too much. So back to you, Aishwarya.
No, that's all great, and thank you so much for painting that very clear picture. It seems like it's such a healthy and conducive ecosystem for legal innovation, and then that's really inspiring to hear. Really excited to see what more legal innovation comes out of the ASEAN region, and also I think just the ASEAN economies in general, they just have a tremendous scope for investment in varied sectors. I mostly specialize in clean energy, so I'm seeing just like a huge amounts of like money flowing in for clean power projects happening at a very fast rate. Singapore, in particular, is one of the economies there with the highest foreign direct investment. I believe about almost like 90 billion or something in 2020, 2021, and that's during the pandemic. So it's amazing. So I'm curious to hear a perspective on the many ways that legal tech tools are helpful for these kinds of international business transactions, because we're talking about entities from different jurisdictions with different understanding of law. So what is the role of legal tech in helping out with these transactions?
I think that's a very interesting question. Your comment earlier about clean technology basically reminds me that many of these imperatives in Southeast Asia, they are really driven by economic needs, but also survival needs as well. Because clean tech isn't just a fad in the region. It is not just a phase, because the push of clean technologies will help in the fight against climate change. And the front lines of climate change are in Southeast Asia. At least some of the front lines are in Southeast Asia. You're talking about countries that are basically bordered by the sea and will face the impacts of climate change in the decades to come. And so I think that gives another dimension to why the governments in Southeast Asia are paying so much attention to some of these new technologies, including clean tech. But going to your question in relation to international business transactions, how is legal tech helpful? I think one of the areas that we've seen the use of legal tech in these spaces is online dispute resolution, right? You can see that many of the e-commerce platforms that are coming up, for example, that do a lot of cross-border transactions, say within the Southeast Asian regions, are tapping on some form of ODR mechanism to address some of these disputes. Because if you were to go through the traditional court systems and you go through all these international private laws and conflict of laws issues, and many of these SMEs that are dealing with businesses or working on international business transactions, they would go out of business like even before you can begin to litigate those issues, because the big companies would simply force them out. So I think ODR as a form of legal technology is really playing a huge role in international business transactions. The other way I think that legal tech in general are helping these transactions is in relation to the use of simple things like translation. Because in the Southeast Asian economy, or Southeast Asian jurisdictions, there are so many different languages in that small area, right? And so things like translations are really just, it sounds basic, I know, but it is a fundamental stumbling block in order to ensure that transactions are able to go through. And in the past, you would require the need of a professional translator to help you have these documents translated. But with things like AI tools, for example, sure, you may not be able to have a legally standing document, but you get the general gist of the document when it's sent over to you. And it significantly helps to drive down business costs, especially for the small and medium enterprises. So I think going forward, there are a lot of ways that legal technology and AI systems are able to help international business transactions. The question then comes to how Singapore can be part of that equation. Singapore has always been seen, or at least has striven to build itself out as a business hub. It's fundamentally underpinned by the trust and stability within the economy, the lack of corruption, and the stable political climate. And these are things that you cannot put a price tag on, but they're very, very valuable. And so what I think Singapore can do is, really trying out these technologies, creating a test bed for the use of these technologies, and that the lessons learned can then be used and shared with the rest of the world, and being a first mover in this space, at least with regard to using technology to support international business transactions. So that's what I would say on that topic.
That's awesome. Thank you, Josh. And that's such an exciting prospect, as integrating more and more AI into international business transactions and to speed them up. Because I've seen just a few of them negotiated, just like in my time, like studying about them, and also like participating in a few. And it gets frustrating when you get a bunch of lawyers from different countries to negotiate a simple document and figure out translation and all that. So thank you for answering that. And now the next question is something that I ask every speaker, and this is something I'm also very personally passionate about, because I'm into academia, and I believe that sort of every change has to emanate from like education in some level, or like the next generation, like creating this next generation of lawyers who are just good at using legal tech, are very accepting of it, and are also trained to use it to leverage its full advantage. What do you think is the intersection between legal education and legal innovation? Are legal tech tools something that should be incorporated in our law school curriculum? Should students be taught about being innovators rather than just being attorneys? What do you think about it?
I'll give a simple answer to this. I do not think there is an intersection. Instead, there should be an integration. Legal tech and legal innovation, as well as legal education, are not things that just happen to cross at one junction and then go their separate paths. They are meant to be in the same pillar. The problem is, many people think that these are things, even in actual lawyering, these are just things that are good to have. That's why they think that after the bar exams, after going through legal education, you can take your time to pursue some sort of side projects to pick up on legal technology. Sure, continuing legal education is definitely important, but I believe that in order for these lawyers to practice in the 21st century, they need to be trained and educated fundamentally as 21st century lawyers, not as 20th century lawyers. And what do I mean by that? That means that going into law school, the use of technology in practice and the use of technology in education has to be a mainstay of legal education. This goes from not just doing legal research from online databases, but thinking from the very start as to professors, many of them have practiced before, and they share about their experiences, right? And they, of course, share from their perspective, which is great because it taps on their vast amounts of experience. But they need to also have these students start thinking about, hey, if I were to do this now in the 21st century, in the decades going forward, how would I do it differently, possibly with technology, and doing it in a way that is regulatorily kosher, right? And things like having activities like hackathons, they shouldn't also just be something that is kept just to legal technology clubs, even though it's a nice way to start. There should be something, I think, sort of practice, right, that should be embedded in the legal curriculum going forward. It should not just be an elective. It should not just be a student club. It should be part of the main curriculum. That's what I believe, because if not, you're going to have lawyers that continue to think that technology is just a nice to have. And then you have a crisis like COVID-19 or something else that comes along, and everyone is caught flat footed. I give an analogy. When I first dove into this legal technology space, I was starting to share thought leadership and articles about this. And I received a comment from a junior from my law school in Singapore on LinkedIn. He said, essentially, he said it, I mean, to be fair, in a very respectful way. He said, with respect, I do not think that legal tech is going to change the future. And then come 3 years later, and you see COVID-19, and you see virtual courts, you see e-signing, and all these things coming up. And I'll leave the audience to decide, right, whether you think the comment by that junior holds true, or what I just shared about integration of legal innovation and legal education holds true. Which is the path that you think will create a more secure and more future-oriented legal profession? And I think that's fundamental, because the legal industry continues to be stuck in its ways fundamentally, even though other sectors have already been disrupted. Transportation, hotel, healthcare, and even education as well, and many more spaces. When is the time for the legal industry to be disrupted? No one knows. People are trying. People will continue to try. But, as everyone says, hindsight is 2020. And once it gets disrupted, everyone will say, oh, we should have seen that coming. We knew it was coming. But right now is the time to start thinking about it and to start training the future generation on that. So that's my own personal perspective. And I hope it coheres with your perspective as well.
Yeah, I very well said, and I cannot agree with you more. I'm fully on board with that, and I really like how you put, like, it cannot be just an intersection. It has to be an integration. Like, legal tech is just has to be part and parcel of practicing law, especially when we're talking about lawyers of the 21st century, millennial, Gen Z lawyers. Gen Z, they're already becoming lawyers. Like, now I feel old now. But yeah, no, thank you for that answer. I fully agree with you, and I do think that it's essential that, just like we're taught about LexisNexis, like Westlaw, that we're taught about other legal tech tools that are also available not just for legal research, but automating the more tedious parts of being a lawyer, automated drafting, contract review, summary creation, e-signing, e-billing. Those things are like pretty well integrated now, but I do think there's a lot more that I think law schools can do by preparing the attorneys of tomorrow. Then it's just like moving on from the law firm billable hour method, that take the time you need to take to review a contract. I think the future is all about.
And to add to that, many of law schools, at least what I've seen both in Singapore, and I thought it might be somewhat different in the US, but it seems to me that often law schools train lawyers, or train law students rather, not to be lawyers, but to be legal academics, because we think so doctrinally about the law rather than the application. I mean, since when have you had an exam in law school that says, how are you going to deal with this in practice? Many people tend to leave those questions to the bar exam, by which time it's too late, because everything is compressed and you're studying so many different subjects. It's not integrated at all. And there was some, I think there was some pilot initiatives by some US law schools. I really can't remember what they are at the top of my head, but I think I read about them saying that they integrate practice into the school curriculum by, for example, having mock sandboxes where people try and play off against each other in different roles, even in doctrinal classes. I think that is something that should be expanded, as well as stretched out across the entire curricula, in terms of spreading out to different law schools and also integrating technology into that process. So from the very beginning, when you're thinking about dealing with an antitrust case, for example, how would you deal with it if you were talking to the regulators and talking to your clients? How would you use, for example, an AI-powered e-discovery system to pull in all the documents together so that you have the best case to present to the regulators or to the courts? That's just one example. And, that's just antitrust alone. You can think of how many ways technology can be integrated into practice in all the different subjects that students are studying. So that's my wish and my message to the legal educators out there in the US and beyond.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I fully agree. And I'm going to quote Professor Fernholz, who you would remember from your LLM fundamentals class. What are your hopes, dreams, and fears with regards to legal tech? So that is my hope as well as my dream as well, that we could have more integration of legal tech in legal innovation, which I think is automatically going to help lead the movement of having more legal tech at work. Because if you're just trained to use it, you're going to realize how crucial it is, with regards to efficiency, saving time, and defining the sort of future of practicing law and moving on from our very traditional methods of teaching law, which is doctrine focused rather than functionality and the practical aspects of law. So just going along that, my last question to you would be: so what's in the pipelines for you? What kind of thought leadership work is Alida doing right now, or what are you doing personally about leading the movement for legal tech in the Asia Pacific?
I think first off, as Aishwarya very kindly introduced, we set up a new club, student organization in Berkeley Law. It's called BLIT, which stands for, and it's a play on the word be lit, right, as in on fire. And LIT stands for Legal Innovation and Technology. And so it's at Berkeley Law. What we wanted to do was to tap on the fundamental expertise, the great expertise and experience in Berkeley Law on law and technology, flip it around and use that to train 21st century ready lawyers going out there. Because the law and tech vertical in Berkeley Law is definitely very strong. In fact, one of the strongest in the world. That can be said in all honesty. But the application of technology to the law, I think it's a vertical, it's a pillar that can continue to be developed going forward. And so I'm really, really glad to be able to light that flame that hopefully takes that movement forward. But going back to life back in Southeast Asia and back in Singapore, I would really love to continue to push on the efforts that Alita has been working on. As I mentioned, Alita has already been handed over to a new generation of leaders, and they have their own initiatives that are in the pipeline. So I think some of the things that they are looking at, of course, is to do things like an extension of the State of Legal Innovation report, and also to do, I think there is this online marketplace portal, which is powered by a US-based legal technology company. And we're really glad for that partnership to provide that to our members so that they can access and see at one glance what are the legal tech products that are out there in the Asia Pacific region, and perhaps to even procure them for discounted prices. And I think that will make a significant difference. So I really hope to be able to support the new leadership in those initiatives and other initiatives that they'll be pushing out as well. The final thing that I would like to do is to continue with my efforts in LawTech.Asia. This is, I would say, a long-term gain sort of initiative that we are not able to see results happen in the next month or the next year. You will see the fruits of that labor come out in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer. But what we want to do is to continue to put thought leadership out there. So we remain at the front of the envelope in terms of thinking in relation to legal technology, as well as to technology law, governance, and regulation. That's important because we want to make sure that there is a one-stop portal where law students can say, hey, I'm not familiar with technology. I want to understand some of the legal issues that explain to me in a simple way that I can understand and grasp and feel a bit more confident about. And then they can think, okay, there's LawTech.Asia, and we can go into that. And so that's something that I do wish to be able to continue going forward. Build up the team, build up the resources that we have so that we can put more thought leadership out there. And this is a shout out and a call, a clarion call to everyone out there who is interested in this space. If you're interested to contribute, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise, and let me know that you'd like to join in the efforts for LawTech.Asia. At LawTech.Asia or at Alita, something that I commonly say is that it's a huge space, ranging from Russia all the way down to Australia, and then up to, we cover also the US, Canada, and the whole of Latin America as well. It's a huge space. It is not something that can be done by Alita alone, or that can be done by LawTech.Asia alone, much less myself alone. We need to do this with partnerships, tapping on the mindsets, tapping on the experiences, and tapping on the lessons learned by everyone in these regions. And so we really, really are excited to partner with anyone who is interested and serious about this space. So that's my shout out to everyone out there.
Great. Thank you, Josh. This has been a wonderful conversation, and thanks for all the trailblazing work that you're doing in leading the legal tech movement in the Asia Pacific. And it's just such a pleasure talking to you about it. And I feel very inspired hearing about the tremendous opportunity that exists for legal tech, and in particular by the fact that the governments also in the region are creating a more sort of friendly environment for legal tech to grow by leading the policy to be in that direction as well. So thank you so much. Wonderful conversation. Thanks to all our audience for tuning in and showing your interest in legal tech as well. Check out Alita. This time I'll get it right. The Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association. Check out LawTech.Asia. Check out BLIT, which is a Berkeley legal innovation and technology through the Center of Law and Technology at Berkeley Law. Check out Speed Legal. We also have our blog where we, keep talking, keep the conversation going about legal tech, and tune in for more episodes every Thursday of Rethinking Legal Ops.
I do want to give a shout out to Aishwarya. I think she is the model example of really a law student that is pushing the envelope in terms of thought leadership, but not just thinking about it, but putting it into action as well, right? It is, people like you that we need to really share about this space and not just talk the talk, but to walk the talk as well. And that's really very important. And I'm really glad that you're doing this initiative, and at the same time, pioneering things in speed legal as well. I would say that if there are 100 Aishwaryas out there, we could do this legal innovation journey so much quicker. And so great job, Aishwarya, great job to the Speed Legal team. And really, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Josh. That is so kind of you, and that means a lot coming from you. Thanks again for joining in today, and I'll talk to you further when I'll see you around in Berkeley and have more wonderful conversations on legal tech.
Go Bears!
Go Bears!